This episode is brought to you by Bubs Naturals. Bubs Naturals is a tribute to former Navy SEAL Glenn Bub Darty, a national hero who laid down his life saving Americans in Benghazi, Libya. Glenn was a best friend to hundreds, people of all walks of life, from ski bums to outdoor enthusiasts, hippies, SEALs, fitness fanatics, and anyone and everyone in between. Glenn's call sign in the Navy was Bub. He stood for self-improvement and was always looking to help others, and that same DNA is woven in to the Bubs brand. They donate 10% of all of their profits to charity in Glenn's honor, starting with the Glenn Darty Memorial Foundation. Now, we were lucky enough to have Bubs come in as a partner at our Power Monkey Camp 19 this spring for the first time, and they were an absolute hit with all the coaches, campers, and staff. We were lucky enough to have a variety of their products to test out, from their collagen protein to their brew coffee, as well as their hydrate or die electrolytes. Now, I was an absolute fan of the hydrate or die. We are on our feet at camp, constantly teaching, training, learning, playing for an entire week, and I needed something to be able to get me through those days, and the hydrate or die was what allowed me to do so, all the way to that last pickleball game at the end of each night. We are excited to have them back on board for our 20th camp come this fall in September, and if you would like to try out some of their product, please be sure to head over to bubsnaturals.com and use the code PowerMonkey, all one word, all caps, for 20% off. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Mike Service, and on today's episode, we have a former CrossFit Games multiple-time individual competitor turned one of the top coaches in the business. She is the owner and founder of Deka Comp, as well as the coach to the second place finisher, the silver medal podium winner, Patrick Vellner, at the most recent CrossFit Games. We are talking, of course, about Michele Letendre. Michele has been on the podcast in the past, and we love chatting with her. We've been up to Montreal a number of times over the years to work with her team and her staff and her athletes. We love her perspective. We love hearing about how the games went from her point of view as a coach and also as a former athlete, how the events went down, what she liked, what she thought were maybe missed opportunities, and also what it's like to be one of the leading females on the coaching side in this space, and what we can do to potentially see more females out there aspiring to do the same thing that her and some others have been leading the charge on. Love speaking with Michele, and we hope you guys enjoy this episode. Michele, thanks for taking the time. It's really good to see you, and we saw you from afar in Madison last week. And first off, congratulations! Like, what an amazing performance for you and for Pat, and I'm sure you guys are incredibly excited in how it all turned out.
Oh yeah, my step count was through the roof,
Just back and forth. It's just 5 feet this way, 5 feet this, pacing back and forth.
I train all year round, but yeah, no, I'm like ecstatic. I'm super happy. Pat and I, on top of his performance, it's just really nice. This year was really different. We were just him and I didn't have any other athletes this year. So we've been working together for like 7 years, and it was really nice for this year to be just with Pat and fully focused on Pat. So it was a great year. And luckily his performance was positive and good, because you never know what can happen, but it was a great time. Really
sure. I want to get into some of the performance stuff and talk through the weekend with you. But you mentioned kind of getting rid of other athletes or focusing your energy in just Pat for the year. Was that done with intention? What's the purpose behind you being a coach? And I'm bringing it up because, if you look at a lot of the other coaches out there, or the super teams, or the locations where people go to, they seem to be trying to recruit as many athletes as possible. Come and train here, turn it into like a teams type situation. And you seemingly have gone the other route of saying, I'm going to focus on all my energy in one. Was that done with intention?
Well, to be honest, this is a huge question, because it's actually something that I've struggled with a lot this year. Thought about kind of, the circumstances up here in Montreal. I don't have a gym, so having a camp is pretty much impossible. And it's something that I was kind of self-conscious about, but at the same time, when I was an athlete, I never went down that route. I was asked by Ben, when I was coached by Ben Bergeron, to go down to Boston and live there. And I had always kind of refused that. I didn't like that lifestyle. And so when this trend of having camps kind of happened, it was something that was a little bit fearful of, because I knew that on a personal level, it's not something that I wanted to create, because I didn't necessarily see the actual value to it as a true competitor. I understand why some people would want that, but I also understand why some other athletes have a lot of success without that. Now, this year, it wasn't an intentional decision. I mean, I had begun the year with 3 individual athletes that were gunning for the CrossFit Games qualification. One of which, Will Bennett, who had more of a top 15 goal, less a CrossFit Games goal. And then the other athlete was a female individual athlete, Freya, but she unfortunately didn't qualify. So I kind of was left with just me and Pat. So having gone through that scenario, it sounds like really bad news. And I mean, like, it broke my heart to have Freya not qualify. But it was an overall positive experience, because it made me realize how important quality is when you're doing this sport, because everything is so intense, from being an athlete to being a coach. It's a short season. There's not a whole lot of opportunities. So every opportunity is so stressful and so important. So I really enjoyed my experience with Pat alone. And I really enjoy the remote aspect of the coaching. So I tend to work really well with more independent athletes and athletes who prefer doing their own thing and being in their own routine. That's always how I was as an athlete. And I feel like if you look at the podium finishers, a lot of those athletes are athletes that are a lot of the time training by themselves, and that benefit from having some training camp experiences. But overall, it's more I think, I mean, Laura's part of the CrossFit Krypton, but she trains a lot of the time at home in her own things. Emma Lawson, I believe, is also kind of part of a really smaller camp. And then Pat, who trains like pretty much all the time alone now. And Roman, I'm not sure what his training situation's like, because he's part of the Mayhem crew, but I don't know how often he actually trains with the Mayhem crew. And so it just seems like it's not a trend that I want to be a part of, but I get it. I understand it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And we brought it up on the podcast when we were speaking with Jason Leiden from Conquer and from CrossFit Milford, that, you put Fikowski in there, you put Ariel Lowen in there, you put a majority of and obviously we didn't even talk about, the champ, Jeff. He's another one that trains basically by himself. And it's interesting in my mind, where everyone is pushing these big camps, these big teams. But if you look at the results, the majority of the people were training individually or with one-on-ones, the way you guys are doing it. And so I think it more comes down to, there's no one way that is the correct way to train to be a CrossFit Games podium winner or Games athlete. There are various routes. And while everyone is kind of aiming towards these major teams, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to lead to success.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And my question to the athletes that are following these camps is to ask yourself why you need those camps. And is it to gain benefit from the intensity, or is it to gain comfort in knowing that you're going to be coached and told what to do? And, like, why are these camps so interesting? And as a coach, I always ask myself that question, just because, like, to me, like you said, there are so many different routes of being a top level CrossFit Games athlete. But the true question that you need to ask yourself is, why am I doing it? And that answer it will kind of be different, but it's not that different from one athlete to another. If you can tell, I mean, like, you guys have been around for a while, you've coached around, and when someone's doing it for the right reasons and someone's doing it for reasons that are maybe not so kind of how would you say that, like, they may not be going at it for a more long-term reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, do you want to jump in, or should I continue
just one, because I like the it's kind of the corny phrase, like the why of why you do something, but you put a little different perspective on it than a lot of athletes or coaches that we've talked to, is like, why am I training with this coach? Why am I training in this environment? And I could imagine a lot of athletes don't ask that question. Like I reflected on it a lot after I was training, why I did certain things. And I think I was a lot more like you, Michele. I like to ask a lot of questions because I wanted to understand everything that I was doing. And I wanted to feel ownership of my programming and training, even if somebody else was putting some input. So I'm almost curious. We could probably do a case study of a lot of the athletes, like the ones that are going to these camps. Do they like to just be told what to do, or is there maybe even some like conflict in that inside? Like, oh, I actually realized that I like to be in more control, and now I have to like kind of, do what everybody's doing or something like that. So it's just an interesting topic. I think it's nice to kind of bring up and let some of the younger athletes that are out there, or athletes that are struggling to find their place. Like, you don't have to go with what seems trendy or what seems popular, but really ask that deeper why question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a question there, Mike, or was that just a note?
Note paraphrase. Yeah, I apologize if I go on a Mike's monologue. Try not to do those on these.
Not at all, not at all. Michele, you mentioned before we actually started the recording that you're still catching your breath post Madison.
Yeah.
What does, obviously from the competitor side, I'm sure you need to just go and lay down for like a week and a half and not do anything. But from the coaching side, it's mentally and emotionally draining for you as well. What does the week after the games look like for you? I'm sure you still have to program and you have to kind of work on your business side of things, but do you need a mental break as well?
Oh yeah. I mean, yes, like you need a mental break. And unfortunately, because of the momentum the games bring to the business, right? Because it's not just coaching. Deka Comp is a full company. It's a company that's run by myself. I have a partner here, but it's really, it takes up a lot of time. And one of our biggest, times of the year, revenue wise, is post games. And when the athletes do really well, there's a lot of momentum to be gained. So you can't just let up, So I wish I could have taken a vacation and just relaxed a little bit. I got a little sick after the games. That happens to me a lot when I go through some high intensity events. I'm sure as athletes, Dave, you've probably gone through this.
Yep.
Mike, you've probably gone through this, but after events, you kind of crash. And life keeps moving. I have other athletes to work with. I have to deal with the other aspects of the business. Deka Comp we have a huge chunk. In fact, probably a little bit more than half of our business is affiliate programming, which is where I spend my most time normally when I'm not in the CrossFit Games season. So just right back on the train and kind of riding the momentum of the games. And then hopefully I have a week vacation scheduled at the end of August, but in the past I've taken that week right after, and it just never ends up working because there's too much things to think about. So you slow things down, you kind of go with what's new, right? There's tons of new movements now that came up because after the games, there's always new things to kind of reincorporate into training. I speak with my coaches in the Deka Comp staff, and we kind of identify key movements that we think are going to be coming up next year. We kind of get inspired by the creativity of the games to kind of refresh our training. So it's a busy time of year, but I have one less thing to think about now. So I'm not in games mode. I don't have to, spend hours of my time trying to figure out how to get Pat ready without injury or other athletes and stuff like that,
There's a lot of questions in there. The first one is, you have to get back in there and just be working again. But is there one thing that you do to celebrate? I mean, Pat's on the other side of the country. I don't think you guys actually have a chance to celebrate together, but what's something that you did when you went home to actually celebrate that second place finish?
Well, this year I actually did get to celebrate with Pat. Him and his family came to the house that we rented.
Oh, nice.
We had a drink and we had dinner, and I know what it's like after the games. Like, all you want to do is eat salad, drink water, and go to bed. So we had our little moment, and then I got back home and I just had a drink with my boyfriend and just chill. Like, the celebration is not as intense, but it's definitely like I gave myself a solid pat on the back. I went to the gym to coach on the Tuesday, and the gym, the Carrie Ann, the gym owner, my really good friend, got me some flowers and a glass, a bottle of wine. So it was like really chill, really relaxed. I'm back on my bike, taking the time to ride my bike, do my own training and stuff like that. So nothing crazy. Unfortunately, I'm boring, but
No, I think the thing is
sure.
that it's giving the listener an appreciation for how draining these things really are. It's not like a huge party happens. It's, I want to just exhale a little bit. I need a chance
Exactly.
to get my things in order again and to be able to actually breathe freely again, because these things are so draining. It takes the whole year to prepare.
Yeah.
Success comes with a little bit of an ability to smile and exhale at the same time. So
Yeah.
congrats again on that.
Thank
But
you.
you brought up something else that I think is super interesting. You said, the new movements that come up at the games that Boz and now Castro back in the mix put out there, it kind of gets reflected in your programming a little bit. What does that look like? You said, you start to think about, okay, what are the next things that we could see leading up to next year? From your mind, we saw some new gymnastics movements and some new variations, not too much barbell work this games. What were some of the takeaways from your perspective in terms of where you see the sport progressing in the next year and how that translates into how you're programming Deka Comp?
Yeah, so I wish I could answer that question with 100% certainty, but with Dave back in the picture, I think things are going to change again. Um, every year there's a trend that settles, and having gone through the games as an athlete for 6 years, from 2011 to 2016, and then coaching, up until today, it was very clear how Dave organized things and how that was in the training, right? And it looks like, just with Dave, it just looked like a whole lot of power conditioning, lots of pulling from the ground, heavy powering lifts. Essentially, that's like the big gist of what Dave was doing. And then when Boz came in, it was very clear that he wanted to see a more skillful athlete. And so when the games finished in 2022, there was some key movements that we knew, like I think all of us knew were coming back. The seated rope climb from alpaca. It was such a topic of debate in the briefing area, where standards weren't super clear for the athletes. Like they must have spent like 15 minutes discussing the standards for that movement back in 2022. And obviously with the rain issues, and they canceled that part of the event, it was like not even a point of discussion. Like I was like, that movement is for sure coming back to the games next year. For sure that workout is going to be at the games next year. But it took me by surprise that it was into the regionals, or the semis, I should say. That being said, because it's part of the games thinking, and we're programming for the best and scaling for the rest, that's something that Deka Comp has always kind of believed in. We had the seated legless rope climb progressions and strength training in the regular training for all athletes. And so when you see a movement like that, where you can kind of wrap your head around this is a standard that can be generalized, then you as a programmer or a coach have to kind of include that in your programming. If we're talking like games level equipment style, remember, I think it was in 2015 where we pushed this like fake, it was called the snail, and it was like a huge cylinder. That's not coming back. That's not going into, like, if it comes back to the games, maybe, but it was a slow movement. So there's this kind of, you can tell if a movement is spectacular enough to come back, or if it's like generalizing enough that you can see it in other parts of the season. And so this year, to me, the pullover is something that has potential to come back. It has the same standards as a bar muscle up. The only thing that I can think of that might be an issue is safety. If people try to do it like Patrick did it, we might find ourselves with a couple of broken necks, So safety wise, I think that might not happen, but quarterfinals and semifinals, we could see that happen again, because the standards are really simple, and it's new, and people are going to practice it. And that's the one thing that goes beyond just Dave and Boz. It's CrossFit's ability to push the boundaries of what athletes' skills are. And they do this regularly with the CrossFit Games all the time. So when you're a coach, you have to recognize which ones are practical and doable and which ones are just for show, for the games, you know.
No,
I feel like
absolutely.
that
I
was a
think it was
long-winded answer for
no,
this.
no, no. I think it was a great response. And one of the things that stood out to me was a topic that we dove into a little bit last week too, talking about the pullover and the way that Pat was doing. And obviously that was an event that kind of was a good one for Pat. I mean, finished in 6th place in the inverted medley. It's a good event and a new movement. The pullover specifically, I was very interested in the way that former gymnasts or people that figured it out did it. And Pat did it this way, probably to its fullest potential. The way we were discussing it in the podcast last week is that it became more of a swing movement than it did a strict pulling movement. So no longer was it pull the hips to the bar and pull your body over the bar. It was more what we call in gymnastics a baby giant or a 3/4 giant, where you're pushing away from the top of bar and using momentum to swing around. So if you had to do 16 reps, the athletes that figured that out or had gymnastics background were able to do it with efficiency, 16 reps unbroken. Yeah. And you mentioned people potentially injuring themselves on this. Obviously, there's a ton of momentum when you push away from the bar that you can slip, peel off of the bar very, very easily. So it always comes down to the mentality of, okay, a games athlete did it and it was efficient and faster. Does that mean that I should be doing the same repetition? For you as a coach, how do you approach that with the way that you program for the everyday athlete? If you put a pullover in and then you use Pat as an example, do you have to put prerequisites in place and say, just because Pat did it this way does not mean that it's appropriate for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I actually put pullovers in my class programming for Deka Comp affiliates like 3 months ago. And when it came out, I was like, I was anticipating them to require a strict pull before. That's what I was anticipating them to do when they announced the pullover. And then possibly a drop every rep, because they've had us done that in the past with the bar muscle ups at the pool. Personally, I think it all depends on the level of responsibility that the people are involved in. Like, honestly, because every movement is on a spectrum, and there's a super safe and there's the games movement, and then people are somewhere in that spectrum. But what's really important is that if people train properly and they take it seriously, there's something to be said about trying what Pat did after gaining capacity, strength, consistency, and all these things. This is such a cheesy answer, but consistency and strength has to come before that level. And I think people are smart enough to know that. And when people aren't, then they learn from their mistakes. And then hopefully those mistakes are not terrible. But I've gone through that kind of stuff. Like when I started doing CrossFit, I remember watching Amanda in 2010 at the games, and I was like, I'm going to do that workout and I'm going to be awesome. And it took me like 20 minutes because I couldn't string together more than 2 muscle ups. And it took me 20 minutes to get this workout done. I ended up with tendonitis in my bicep. I had all kinds of problems. And then that summer I went way too far with my training. I was super swollen everywhere. And then I said, okay, like this isn't working. And then I learned, and then I started gaining a little bit more intelligence in how I was going about things. So I think there's something to be said about learning and making those mistakes and kind of getting carried away and then kind of pulling back, because those are the best lessons learned. Is like hard lessons are the best lessons learned. But hopefully coaches out there will recognize that you don't want to pull back and tell someone not to do something. It's like kind of the worst thing you could do to someone that's super ambitious and super like intense, and you can't just go and say, no, you can't do this because you're not Pat Vellner and you're not this, you're not that. But the reality is that you'll have to manage their level of ambition with their safety. And you do that kind of letting them explore the movement and hopefully providing enough security around it that if they do fall, they won't break their necks.
Mike, I'm going to let you jump in here 1 second, but I just love that response because that's actually how we've been trying to parent our children. In the sense that instead of telling them no, which I have a tendency to do a lot, like, no, don't climb that tree or don't, from a safety measure, we're trying more to create a plan, right? And to give them some more ability to have a voice in the process to get to something that could potentially be dangerous and say, okay, you want to climb that tree, you want to go and do that particular thing, you want to swing from the bar. What's the best way to go about doing it? Let's put some things in place. Do we need a mat underneath us? Do we need to make sure that we have A, B, and C in place and give them, we talk about athlete ownership a lot, but the same thing, give the athlete the ability to have a little bit more ownership around the movement and give them a plan rather than just saying no. So I think that's kind of the direction that we did take with these movements that might be a little bit more new. Instead of saying, don't do it like Pat, we have to say, okay, you need to have A, B, and C. So let's work on those. And then you can try, the next variation.
Yeah. I think play is a huge part of sport, and we need to let people kind of play the sport. And sometimes when you play, you get hurt, and sometimes you actually learn something really important.
Yep.
So, not letting people play is kind of, I can only imagine how my career would have turned out if people told me to stop training like I was a games athlete, instead of just like giving me the space to do it and letting me learn on my own,
Sure. Go for it, Mike. You wanna jump in?
Oh man, no, I mean, I could just affirm everything that both of you were saying a lot there, but I guess maybe for a good visual for our barbell listeners, when you were talking about, like, let's say the pullover, the way that Pat was doing it, to me that compares so much to like somebody just wanting to max out their snatch, and you're like, have you ever done a muscle snatch? Like, have you ever done an overhead squat? Like, here are the movements that we can play with after experiencing maybe like complete failure on a full snatch. And I think that's those are just good words that you're using too, like, allow people to play and allow people to experience and learn. And then, from that, which I think Dave and I try to do a lot, is give appropriate progressions for everybody to build on this like spectrum that you're talking about. Like, we're all on a spectrum within the movements. And I guess, yeah, it's just, from me, it's just nice to hear this from you. And I think it's a good voice to hear from all of our listeners, is like a very, very well-respected coach in the community, talking about all of these different nuances and layers within the sport.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
From the games perspective, workouts themselves, any of them that you thought were programmed really well? Any ones that you were like, wow, this is not just for Pat in general, but just from a programming perspective?
Yeah. Well, usually the workouts I like are the ones that Pat hates.
Why is that?
Well, we're so different. Him and I are literally two different athletes. Like, we are on opposite ends. The only place where Pat and I kind of resemble each other is how opinionated and hard-headed we can be.
Makes for a great coach-athlete relationship there.
Yeah, I mean, it's been going on for so long. People always ask us, they ask me how it works, and I'm like, it works because we're remote.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I really liked, I think I really liked all the workouts this year. And the biggest reason I really liked them is because I can tell that the athletes weren't completely beat up. They were tired, and like anyone would be during a competition, it's a lot more mental than it is physical. And I mean, that's not true. It is very physical, but like, people were tired, but there was way less injury this year than previous years. Like, I think there were a couple of dropouts from injuries. Like, I mean, obviously Krennikov breaking his foot is kind of like a freak accident. And I know that some other athletes had some issues that were stemming from before the games that got aggravated at the games. But it just felt like this year was just, there was no huge misses and risky movements. That said, I know that spectators have seemed to like not really enjoy the workouts, but I think in terms of tests, I really like them. As a programmer, like, I love the bike. I really like the 5K run. I loved Helena. I think Helena is probably my favorite because I love Helen so much. It's one of my favorite CrossFit workouts. And I really like this. To be honest with you, there's not one of them that I didn't really like. The one thing that I wish they would have had more of was the barbell. I feel like that was a little bit of a miss. Like using the same bag twice could have been a little bit different, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But the element of the sandbag squats is something that games athletes should be exposed to, you know what I mean? So to be fair, if you look at the games events as part of the whole season, open, quarters, semis, and games, I think the athletes that have made it to the top have been tested in all the things, you know? And that's what we kind of forget sometimes. We kind of forget that at the games, you've gone through some traditional gym stuff before you get to the games.
Right.
And so at the games, they have the advantage of the space. They have the advantage of the outdoors and all that stuff. But it was kind of clear with the workouts that they're cutting back a little bit on some budget things. It felt like the workouts were simple, effective, but they weren't like CrossFit Games workouts as we know it, like huge implements and crazy things. It was very achievable and very, very simple.
Mm-hmm. The Helena workout was one of our favorites too. We're actually going to do it as a team this week, as part of our inner team where we wanted to give it a try. I don't really feel like it has too much connection to Helen, but they changed it up quite a bit, but it's still an awesome workout.
It's a stimulus. And then Helena represents the stimulus of Helen for us. And for the games athletes, like when I spoke to Pat, I'm like, do you think you're going to break up the bar muscle ups? Because all I can think of is like, you guys have been pulling for like 2 days straight nonstop. Mm-hmm. I think that morning they did the rope climbs. I'm not sure how that kind of stuff gets lost a little bit, but there was so much pulling involved. So in my head, I'm like, they're going to break up the bar muscle ups or some people are going to fail or whatever. And it just looked like Helen. It looked like I coach Helen in the gym. Everyone goes running and they come back and they do everything unbroken. And then that's what it looked like. But if I were to do Helen, it would not look like that.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying. It's so different. And to be honest, I had a huge conversation with Pat about this. And I try to help Pat realize that he's dealing with CrossFit and it's not what Pat wants it to be sometimes. And so I said, I bet you're going to do Fat Helen. Like it's going to be very simple. It's going to look like Helen. And it's going to be an intense race. And you guys are going to have to push the pace on the run more than anything because it's where you can gain the most ground. And he wholeheartedly disagreed with me. And he said that, a lot of the CrossFit benchmarks are now obsolete and they're irrelevant in that level of fitness. And I disagree with him on that. I think they're not irrelevant, but after seeing Helena, I understand what he meant. Like a games athlete doing Helen, it's like Fran. At one point, you're fighting against your physiology, your anatomy, like your height, and you're fighting against your range of motion. And then there's a limit to your reps per second, so Fran is like something that can't really be trained anymore for some of these athletes.
Mm-hmm.
But Helena, I think is probably one of my favorite ones. But now because I bike so much and I do a lot of triathlon in endurance sports, I really like the bike event.
Mm-hmm.
When it came out,
I want to talk about the bike. I want to talk about that. I just want one last thing on Helena because, but I do want to get to the bike because that was the first workout and kind of set the tone for the first day of Vellner's weekend. But Helena was, I think, the first workout that was on ESPN for the weekend. And that was done back on ESPN. You had a full audience that most likely are not, everyday CrossFitters that are watching it. And Helena was a very spectator-friendly on television event. In the stadium, you missed out on the 400-meter run. You didn't know where the athletes were when they were outside. But we watched it on a big screen from, one of the vendor village areas. And it was awesome. Like as a spectator, I loved watching it. So from that side of it, do you as a coach care if events are spectator friendly, if they're not a great test, in the sense that it's going to bring in more viewers, it's going to get more people involved and engaged so that we can actually help build the sport? Does that factor in at all in terms of creating a good event?
To be honest with you, like me personally, I don't care.
Okay.
Like I try to look at workouts and understand how to solve it. A workout, a test, an event is a problem and it needs to be solved. And so that's how Michele, coach, looks at the workout. But as a fan of the sport and as a player in the environment of CrossFit Games, yes, I totally care. I totally care. This is it's a good question, because the fact that it was on ESPN, the fact that people are looking at it, I agree with you 100%. And to be honest with you, I don't know why people in the stadium didn't like watching Helen, because you missed out on the 400-meter run. To be honest, I prefer watching running events on TV anyways, because otherwise I can't see everything. You kind of block. But when you're looking at, especially if it's an 8-person heat, I thought it was a great way to look at a run on the screen, because you can see all the athletes and you see it in an angle that is actually close than, seeing these little people run by. So I thought it was great. I agree. It was a great workout to put on ESPN. It was a smart move. And I think that's where Dave, a little bit more than maybe Boz, has a touch to understand like what will get people drawn in. Because in my opinion, like the inverted medley with the pullovers, like I like the test, but if I was a spectator knowing nothing about CrossFit and I watched gymnastics and I saw that, I'd be like, this is a little weird,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I do care, and I want that to happen. I just don't want that to become the sport, because there's a content in the sport of CrossFit. There's a purity of the tests that they're trying to kind of figure out. There's something to be said about what they're doing with CrossFit and the proof that people can do amazing things. And the amazing things don't have to be just visually stunning. Like a 5K run is spectacular at the finish line, but what they're going through in that workout is just, it's like, to me, it's like the equivalent of watching a normal person trying to run the fastest 5K against an Olympian. Like there's something about that dynamic that's so fun to watch without kind of always looking at the absolute best of each sport. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully people who are drawn in by the spectacularness get to do CrossFit and then have a much deeper understanding of that,
Yeah, without a doubt. I love that. I think that's a incredibly well-rounded viewpoint on it from both the coach and the spectator side of things. The ride, for whatever reason, Vellner seems to start out his weekend slowly and finish incredibly strong. I was reading a little bit about his perspective. He's been putting up posts about each of the events, how he went into them, how he seemed to have liked the ride, like from just an event standpoint. But it didn't turn out so great. 27th in that first event. You seem to love biking. What were the sticky points for Pat with that particular event in terms of it not turning out maybe the way that you guys hoped?
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, it was a pacing mistake, and it's something that I'll take responsibility for. I kind of it's a very risky job, this job, because we don't know the events, we don't know the paces, we don't know the data, we don't know much about how to attack things like that. And there are very specific metrics usually in endurance sports that how to stay within your capacity and what's possible to reach out of the capacity. And plus the riders have absolutely no data. Like they don't have a computer, they don't know what wattage they're pushing. Like there's so much that they don't know. And so you have to rely a lot on other competitors. And, Pat's been doing tons of biking training, not just like Echo Bike and not just, all the things. I've been giving him a lot of my biking training that I've been doing, adapting him for him so that he can continue to gain VO2 max and power endurance and all that stuff on the bike, which is great because he's older. So biking is less impact. And we've done a lot of that training to help him kind of stay fit without too much CrossFit-y type leg flexion, all that stuff. So we came into this workout knowing very well what 40 minutes felt like because he's done 40+ minute trainings. The only thing is that we don't know what that translates to in actual biking. in terms of kilometers per hour, especially on that type of turf with that type of equipment, because a mountain bike has a way different feel. On top of that, they're using a mountain bike on grass. So I was talking to Pat and I'm like, man, you're going to be pushing so much wattage for such little speed. You get like, if we start too strong, that wattage is going to have you bonk. And there was a lot of worry into how long 40 minutes is. But so the strategy was to kind of not go out hard. The strategy was to start to push at 25 minutes to the end of the race. The problem is that the way he was set up is that he was on the first line right in the middle. And so what happens when you're in the first line right in the middle is that this kind of horseshoe effect happened, and he got sucked into the middle of the pack. And so when you're sucked into the middle of the pack, there's nowhere to go. You can't go forward enough. You can't. So ideally, he would have been on the outside. He would have been in the front line on the outside. And that way he can kind of push hard and cut in. And then there are some times where, you know, I'll kind of suggest to Pat, like, you kind of have to go hard or you have to pull back. And workouts like this, I kind of let him make that decision, because I know how much nerves can be in a mass start like that, especially with a bunch of guys with these huge bikes. So the strategy was to start kind of slow and then pick up. And we knew how many laps he was going to get. Like, we knew he was going to be at 7 laps. Like, that was mathematically what was going to happen. And so the goal was to kind of creep up every lap. But when you get sucked into pack riding, it's very hard to get out of those packs, because the second you're alone, you're working so much harder. And so there was just a lack of real estate to kind of pull back in the lead group. And so it was truly a pacing error on our part. And I'll take fully the blame, because, you know, the strategy was really to start smooth and go hard. But, you know, in hindsight, it should have been break away with the lead pack and then kind of pull back from that lead pack, staying in the back there. But there's also a reasoning why we said to start slow, is because last year's bike event, you know, I told Pat, stay with the lead pack, stay behind the group. And then he was just overreaching, and he ended up really not doing well in that bike event last year, because he was just like redlining almost the whole time. So it's not like a swim where there's just, you know, he's just not a good swimmer and we've done everything we could, but it's just like, it's just kind of one of those events where we took a risk and it didn't pay out. And then sometimes you'll take an event and you'll take a risk and it totally pays out. It pays off. I mean, so it was kind of unfortunate, because when he finished the event, if, you know, to be honest with you, he didn't look that banged up. Like, he was tired, but he wasn't completely wrecked. So part of me, like, as a coach, I'm kind of happy about that, because at least he didn't get a 27th and was completely destroyed.
Yeah.
So that meant that he could still push for the rest of the weekend. But to be honest, like, expecting perfection when you have an athlete like Pat is silly, because he takes risks. He's not afraid to take risks. And that's why he always has one of those bad events. He just, he sees an opportunity and he'll take it, and he knows he might fall. And yeah, so when you have athletes that are willing to risk certain things to go for that top spot, you'll get athletes that will fail spectacularly.
Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of a necessity at that point to be able to take risks as an athlete. You gotta know, you know your limits, know when to take that leap, and Pat obviously has more experience than most when it comes to that. Last question about Pat in the weekend here, but you know, Pat's 33 now. He's coming up to potentially even becoming a master's athlete, but clearly he's still, you know, prime of his career. Is the intention to continue to stay in the individual for as long as possible, even if that means past 35?
I think so. As long as Pat stays competitive, he's going to continue. He really likes to compete. I think he's very reasonable in the sense that, like, Pat's built a career around CrossFit. Like, he's a chiropractor and he has a family and all these things. So I wouldn't be like, his retirement will be on his terms. but so long as he can be competitive, I think he's going to keep going. It's not something that like, those are his decisions. He doesn't come up to me and say, what do you think, Michele? Or like, and to be honest with you, I don't even know if he would tell me when he's retiring, because I think he just wants to see how he feels. And when he wins events like that interval workout, when you win events like that dominantly, you're not ready to stop. Like,
Sure.
you know, so long as he's still managing his injuries, because I mean, everybody has injuries at this level, but if we can continue to have productive training and manage his injuries, I think he's going to be competitive for a really long time.
Well, five podium finishes, right? And slowly chipping away, I'm sure in the back of his mind, he's saying, if the workouts align correctly and I'm on my game and I take the correct risks, I could end up on the top of that podium. I mean, there's so many Canadians these days too. I think we could just talk about the Canadian push here. I mean, Mike, I think you want to jump in, but I want to talk about.
No, you stole my transition, Dave. I was like,
go for it. Canadian
like,
pride here. Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, no, I was, and probably a question for Pat, but I was just curious if he was a little bit heartbroken to not have a PB&J podium finish, to be like so close with those guys.
Yeah, and to be honest, we all thought it was possible. If Brent had a better finish to the last event, like it would have been possible. Roman was so dominant. He was so dominant throughout the weekend. I think it was very clear from the beginning that like he was unbeatable. But that year, but we all kind of hoped and it would have been so amazing to watch. But the quality of Canadian athletes that are out there right now is just mind blowing. And it makes me so proud to see that, because it's just like, it's such a hard market. Canada is such a hard market for competitive CrossFit. We don't have a whole lot of competitions. There's not a whole lot of financial opportunity for that. The athletes that are Canadian, that are well known right now, have the financial opportunity because, I mean, they're top level. Hopefully that will trickle down to athletes that are trying to make it, but it's a very tough market. And hopefully this blew a little bit of wind in people's sails so that they can get moving, because Canadians are strong athletes. The French Canadian community here is very competitive. This year they didn't make it, but Pro 1 team has made it repeatedly to the games. They've been very competitive at the games. This year they had some athletes that struggled with injury, but it just makes me so proud. I'm so happy. You know, back when I was competing, it was me and Camille and then a couple of guys here and there, but it was just, you know, we were such a small community of competitive athletes, and now it just feels like it's just entering a new phase.
Do you think, I mean, is it cultural? Like what is it? Because there were like 6 guys in the, out of the open guys, and then there were two women, and like you said, when you were competing, it was you and Camille, and then occasionally somebody else would pop in there. So to see that concentration of athletes from a not hugely populated country, is there something? Is it because you and some of the coaches are putting some magic out there, or
we have access to fresh water? I don't know, honestly. Like, I don't know what it is, because we're a little bit scattered, right? Mm-hmm. Pat's been a little bit everywhere because he's been in the East and he's been out West for the last couple of years. But it's always been like the Canadian sports has always been East Coast, West Coast. Like it's not just CrossFit. It's like that in sports a lot. Like the population is densely in the East or densely in the West, and then in the middle there's not a whole lot going on. But it's traditionally, culturally in Quebec, the French Canadians, like there's a lot of sport going on. Like there's a lot of people who do sports when they're young. Like hockey is such a big sport. So you have all of these ex-athletes that find CrossFit as a new sport, right? And then that kind of grows into affiliates having more competitive programs, affiliates growing into their kids programming, and then like younger generation being exposed to it. I think that's like everywhere in the world. The reasoning for the quality of the athletes, man, I wish I knew. I think it's just excellence breeds excellence. Like what is that? There's a bias, or there's a phenomenon that happens when you have good athletes coming from an area, and I can't remember what the name of it is. But when your role model is Camille Leblanc-Bazinet, who won the games, like, you can dream big. It allows you to dream big, that a young girl from Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu can make it to the top level of a huge sport. So I think that instills a discipline and a will to kind of really discover what you're made of. And then on the men's side, like, to have someone like Pat, who's he's so outspoken, and Pat and Brent, actually, they're so well spoken. They carry the flag with so much pride, and listening to them speak, it's so inspiring. It's people who have jobs that can do big things. So I think they're very people identify with them very much, you know. And Emma Lawson, still in school, Jack Farlow, still studying. Like, these are people that do excellent things and that are also bigger than just CrossFit. So to me, it just demonstrates that, like, you don't have to be a full-time professional athlete to be the best in your sport. You can also do other things really well while chasing that level of excellence. And so we have great role models in that way.
I think that, yeah, the role model thing is, I think, big, that you touched on there, and opening athletes' minds to being able to believe that they can accomplish something. But I think we shouldn't lose sight too. I mean, the two now well-known female coaches in the world of CrossFit are both in Canada as well. So it's
we
like
live in the same city.
Yeah, I mean, this is also pretty crazy. And I think maybe just from my perspective, CrossFit has always done a really, really good job of kind of showing the men and women's side as like of equal value, you know, not like a lot of other sports kind of fall to the wayside. With the coaches side of things, that seems to maybe be growing now too, with you and Caroline kind of stepping up and showing off a little.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it took a while. Like, I'm so proud of Caroline. Like, she's done such a great job. You know, she's a leader in the community, and she's clearly, you can tell, like, you can feel and smell the energy that like, she's just all in all the time. And, you know, to be honest, like, yes, CrossFit has always demonstrated equality between sexes. I think that's something that we do really well. I think the coaching standpoint is still lacking. I mean, Caroline has done a great job. I have done my best over the last 6-7 years. I think that we need more female key opinion leaders in the community. And it's not just coaching. I think that within the CrossFit organization, within the CrossFit sport, we need to see more women in the top positions. It's still, and this is something that I don't like to talk about, but it's still a male dominated industry. And the female side is the sports side, the athlete side, to me, it's like, you know, we're there. I think the women athletes are sometimes even more financially steady than the male athletes. And we have social media to thank for that, because I think that's something that separates a lot of in the athlete side. But in the key positions, I do think that it's kind of sad right now that every time I have a question or I have a concern or a debate or something to really address seriously when it comes to the sport, I have to do it with a man. It's always like that. And it's not like I don't know how to say this. It's not, they're not bad people, but it's an intimidating world. I'm a 5'1", 130-pound woman. And in the warm-up areas, plus organizational areas and administrate, all of the background stuff of coaching life, it's all men that just are like 2 heads or 4 heads sometimes taller than me. So it's super intimidating sometimes. And so Caroline and I are both women that I think are very opinionated. And I'm not one to scream and shout, but I won't back down. But it's a very intimidating environment for a lot of women. There's a question also of credibility, you know. Sometimes I ask myself if people would trust my vision and my work if I hadn't gone to the games 6 times. If I would have been a female athlete that was just coaching and I happened to to stumble on a male or female games level athlete and brought them to the games, would I get the same kind of credibility that I have now? You know, for a long time before Caroline, I was the only female coach there. And I was also the only coach that had 6 games appearances as an individual athlete. So is that what it takes for women to be recognized and get the credibility as a coach? And if so, that's such a shame. Like, you know, no male coaches have ever gone to the games as individuals, except for Sharanki. I can't remember his name. He's Emmett Tall's partner and coach. And Ben Bergeron, who was on the team, I think in 2010 or 2009. And so I still think that we have room to grow. I still think that there's a lot of discussions to be had. And I never wanted to be, for a long time, I wanted to hide that identity of being a female coach, because it's like, just because I'm a woman, I was getting questions like, what's it like to coach a top male athlete as a female? You know, I don't want to play that angle. But I realized this year that if we're going to make a change, it's going to come from people like me and people like Caroline that talk about it. And yeah, so we still have room to grow. And I think that if anything, the culture of CrossFit is way more inviting, but we still need more from CrossFit. We still need top level CrossFit Games representatives to be women, to be minorities, because it's still kind of, in that sense, it's kind of how do you say that in English? Like it's monochromatic, you know what I mean? There's not a whole lot of diversity.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you're in my mind, you're in like a admirable but unenvious position. It's like, yeah, you kind of have a torch to bear, and like you said, maybe not wanting to have to bring all these things up all the time, but at the same point, realizing that it's still a necessary conversation. And I think from my perspective, yeah, CrossFit does always seem to come off very you know, diversity focused and wanting to, you know, give everybody a voice. But then at the same time, like you said, when you go into a, you know, whether it's an admin meeting or a room with all the coaches, like you can look and be like, nope, it's pretty obvious like what the dominant species is here. And probably like anything, the conversation is the starting point, and like not to have a bias on one way or the other, but just to be able to start talking about these things and, you know, lift up some people that need lifted up, and then be willing to shake the tree a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, it is changing. Like Caroline and I are in the spotlight right now, but I know that Training Think Tank has a female coach in their staff, and like there are other female coaches out there. And I've said this before, there are female coaches in the CrossFit Games. There are so many of them. They're in the age group divisions, they're in the masters and teen divisions and the adaptive divisions, but in the elite division, it's like almost, it's impossible that there are none. It's impossible that there are none. Yeah. It's just they haven't gone through, and I don't know if it's because some women think they can't, or if it's because athletes don't give them the opportunity. But women coaches have a different perspective, and we can't change that. That's something that's like, as a female coach, business owner, woman in the world, in society, I have a different perspective from men in society and men coaches and etc. It's just the nature of it. But what I bring, for example, with Pat is that, you know, sometimes Pat doesn't think of breaking things up. Like we had a conversation about the pig chipper workout where the wall balls, he's like, you have to be unbroken on that workout. And I'm like, no, you don't. Why on earth do you think that, you know? And he would never in his right mind think of breaking 100 wall balls at 20 pounds, because he can do Karen unbroken. And he could do Karen unbroken probably twice over with a 5-minute break, you know what I mean? But there are certain sensitivities that come with being a female athlete and having gone through difficulties of overhead pressing and wall balls, and what happens when you get tired from that. What does it mean, upper body fatigue, after accumulating so much stuff? And that's a unique perspective. You know, I know tons of CrossFit coaches just in gyms that have never gone through a ring muscle up progression because they've never had to. And that's a problem. And so, and then even when they do go through the ring muscle up progressions, they probably don't feel the same way a member might, because they have innate strength. They know how to do the movement, And so when you're asking them to progress with a specific scaling option, whatever, and they don't know what they're supposed to feel, it's just, and it's not their fault, you know, and their perspective will be different for other things, you know what I mean? So there's something to be said about that could be very strategic and very beneficial. But then on the flip side, there's a sense of aggression and assertiveness that is not as natural for me anyway. Being aggressive on the bike is not natural to me. Telling Pat, you're gonna have to go really hard for the first 10 minutes and suck it up. Like, to me, that's not a natural plan. And there's a certain part of watching athletes hurting, you know, like, and that could, again, it could be just me. It could be Michele with that sensitivity because I was an athlete. So like, I don't want to hurt that much. Like, no, you don't have to make it hurt that much, you know? So as long as you're self-aware, you can use that specific perspective to your advantage, you know?
Would that be if you were to speak to the next generation or the females out there that are considering being a coach or a little bit scared because of, you said, the demographic that normally is coaches, is that something you would say as a word of wisdom, say your perspective as a woman is something that helps you stand out here? And it has for me. Is that something you would pass along if someone's out there that might want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, everybody's perspective as a coach will benefit them in their career, male or female. Whether you're a male athlete that has never competed at high level, but you love the sport and you understand the sport, that will help you. I remember one of my favorite weightlifting coaches is a guy that he looks like an endurance runner, and he was not a good weightlifter, but he was extremely intelligent, understood the methods of training for weightlifting, understood biomechanics, and understood my reality as a CrossFit Games athlete that wanted to compete in weightlifting. And he was probably one of the best coaches I was ever training under because of his perspective and understanding. And so everyone's perspective will help everyone, but particularly if there are women out there listening right now and that want to dive into the coaching world, my suggestion is to put yourself out there and try things and work with your athletes. You're probably going to have to develop more of a partnership relationship than an authority relationship that other relationships might more traditionally have. Like, I consider myself Pat's partner in his career, not his coach in a more traditional sense. Although, you know, it depends how you see the position. One of the most important things too is understanding what you're putting your athletes through. I have the advantage of having gone through tons of CrossFit training in my career, so I don't have to test all of my training systems and all my ideas. Sometimes it'll just be, I think I know how this goes and blah, blah. And sometimes it's straight up like, there's been years where I've told Pat, I want to try this thing. Do you want to try it with me? Like, this is the goal and this and that. And Pat will most likely say yes, but you have to put yourself out there, and you have to try things, and you have to be honest about it with your athletes when you're trying things. People like working with someone. They like being part of a process. People who are invested in their careers, like, you know, they say when you're content with your job is because you feel like you're providing value and you have something to say. So as an athlete, you'll probably feel more valued if you have something to say about your training or you're involved in your training in some way. And so if you're just beginning as a coach, I think that's the best piece of advice. You have to know that you have to put yourself out there, try things, talk to your athletes, and don't expect to know everything. And the athlete will probably appreciate that mindset of, this is something I want to work towards and try with you. Tell me what you think, you know? So getting the athlete involved in your process. And as long as you're good at reading the results and reading the outcomes of it, you know, you'll get more and more wins under your belt, and you'll feel more and more comfortable kind of reaching out to other athletes that maybe are higher level, or et cetera, et cetera. But you have to try. I mean, I asked Pat to coach him with zero experience. And I think about this now and I'm laughing because, like, I would have never done that. I was so cocky. Like, I asked the second fittest man in the world, or the third fittest man, who literally went to the game once in podium, like, hey, I'm about to dive into programming and coaching. Would you like to work with me? You know? and he gave me a shot, and we were really good at kind of talking through our problems and talking through the year, and just discussing things and planning things out together. And it turned out to be probably the best decision I had ever made. But you have to want to coach.
Love it. I love it. Thank you for that. I mean, you helped pave the way as a Canadian athlete to show that Canadians can end up not just on the podium, but the champion side of it. Now you're paving the way as a female, what it's like to actually coach in this world as well. And it's amazing to see. You and Caroline have been kind of bright stars from these games that need to be spoken about and need to be put up on a pedestal for the amazing work that you're doing with not just these athletes, but the male athletes, the champions, the ones that most people would shy away from thinking they can train. There's a little bit of you said cockiness, confidence, whatever it is, but it's amazing to see what you've done, and we're proud of you. We're proud to see this journey, and we thank you sharing some of the process that you've gone through with Pat over the years with us.
Oh, thank you so much. Jeez, I'm blushing. Thank you.
Oh, of course. And I think I just want to add that it should be about a meritocracy, right? And I think we hear people talk about that a lot. Like, if you're good at what you do, it should be recognized, whether you're a male or female, whatever it is. If you're a good coach, you should be recognized for it. It shouldn't be that you're two heads smaller than the other person, the other coach in the, in the back area, and you're not being listened to because of your height. If you're good at what you do, it should be recognized for it. So what we hope for is more of a meritocracy-based coaching situation for the females out there as well. And if you're good, you'll get the opportunities. And that's what I think we're all pushing for as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So we had you on a little while ago, years ago now, so a couple of years ago. So I'm going to ask you the questions again. So maybe the things have changed. And so if you're okay with it, we just got a couple quick hitting questions for you.
Let's go.
What sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Weightlifting.
Yes.
Great.
I think I must have answered the same thing a couple of...
You're 2 for 2.
I was hoping for something else.
Sorry, Dave.
I'm going to keep having you on and ask you that question until it changes. Question number 2. Anyone you think we should have on the podcast that would be a good interview for us?
Within the CrossFit space?
Anything.
Doesn't matter. Just don't say like Elon Musk, which we get every once in a while. Like, if you can help us get Elon Musk on, sure.
Oh man, I don't like, I'm bad with like celebrities and people. I would love to hear Roman in an interview, and I think I'm excited to when his English gets better, because I feel like there's something about Roman that I would love to know more of, his process and everything. And I would really like to hear it. I wish either I understood Russian or anything, but I would like to hear more about that. And if I were to say like celebrity, a person that I would love to hear interview is probably, I think I must have answered this when you asked me, but it would be Serena Williams.
That would be amazing. I'd love to talk to Serena too. She's a beast.
I mean, if we could get Roman with English and then Serena, that would be quite the year for us.
Yeah, no kidding.
Putting the bar high for us.
I would say so. Let's start with Roman. Maybe we can make that one happen. See how
Max El Haj too. Max El Haj from
training. Yeah.
He like, I had the opportunity this year to speak to him for like the first time. We've had some conversations, and he's a smart guy, really fun to talk to.
Yeah, we've had a lot of the guys from Training Think Tank around on podcasts talking athletes and some of the other coaches. So we probably should put that as part of the agenda as well. Movies or books? If you're a book reader, anything that you've read recently worth passing along? If not, a TV show or a movie that you'd like the listeners to know about?
I do a lot of audiobooks, and my favorite book that I read, not recently, but last year, is Think Again by Adam Grant. And but like most recently, I just finished a novel called The Goldfinch, and it was actually pretty good, like really good. So
is that the one that they adapted into a movie not that long ago?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm not a huge movie buff. I don't know anything.
Jordan
yeah, I
just is giving
know.
you Jordan's giving you side eye right now.
I know. I'm not a the last time I went to the movie theaters was to see Ted.
There has since
I'm
been a
not a huge
sequel,
movie
and
person.
I think we've got our clip for the teaser for the podcast now. So there we go.
hey, well, Jordan at least appreciates that as a Bostonite, a Boston-based movie. There you go.
Yeah.
Michele, thank you. It was great chatting with you. Again, congrats on such an amazing performance. I hope you do get to enjoy it a little bit, and I'm sure you're already prepping for next season. But we do hope that we get to see you sometime soon. If not up in Canada, sometime in the States. We'd love to see you in person.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And for all of the listeners out there, please be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for upcoming services and events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Dave Durante, at Power Monkey Fitness, and at Mike Service. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we are your hosts. I am Dave Durante with my co-host Mike Service. And until next time, thank you all for listening.